Okay, so welcome to Vibe, everyone. Vibe Book and much more. Vibe Book and Music Shop is in Moi Wo. It's on Lantau Island and it's in Hong Kong. And today we've got a talk from Cathy Cole and Charmian Woodhouse about Lantau Coasteering. So, if none of you knew what coasteering was before, hopefully by the end of the talk you'll understand better. So, without further ado, I'll introduce Charmian Woodhouse, Cathy Cole. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. It's great to be here at Vibe. Always love being here at Vibe. So today we have a talk for you about our adventure that we coast-steered around the whole of the coast of Lantau. And yeah, so we have a little introduction. Here is what we looked like in our coast-steer kit.
Char, tell us about yourself.
Yes. So I grew up in Cape Town and I went diving with my brother. So I went traveling all around the Cape Peninsula. And then we moved to Sydney and I started open water swimming in Sydney and did a bit of kite surfing. And that was really useful to learn about the currents and the winds and things like that. And those are all things that I used with our coast-steering trip.
And we're going to tell you in a little bit how we actually got into coast-steering, because until we did this, neither of us had really done it before. But until then, my love of the ocean started when I was little. We lived in Taiwan at the time, and my parents used to take us to the southern coast, and we would go beachcombing for the glass Japanese fishing float. So they'd get us up at the crack of dawn, and we'd be out there as the sun rose trying to gather these glass balls that had washed up on the rocks. So I think that was the beginning of my love of the ocean.
So in every walk with nature, one receives more than he seeks. And we really did find more than we thought we would on our trip, both in terms of the beautiful nature and the rocks, but also in terms of our adventure, the things that we experienced along the way. So here's a little video that will show you a little bit about what we were doing. Walking on the rocks. We did a lot of clambering along the rocks and swimming.
This just kind of sets the stage of what it looked like to be on the coast of Lantau.
So you'll see the coast actually changes quite a lot. The island is about just over 100 kilometers in circumference. And there were so many different terrains that we went through. Every time we went out, we were amazed at how interesting it was. And this section, there were really big boulders.
And some people talk about coast-steering, some people think of it as rock climbing. We actually did not do any rock climbing. We spent all of our time either right on the water's edge on the rocks or within the entering in the water. So it was probably half that we were walking on the rocks and half in swimming in water. So you see here, Char's going to get in and swim the next bit.
So here you can see a rocky shelf. So some parts were really easy to go on and some parts were much more challenging.
Are you swimming?
So sometimes we had a free ride with the currents. Here we are. That's back in Moi Wo.
So how did we get started on this? Both Char and I are trail runners. We've spent a lot of time running the trails of Lantau. So we've done this a lot, and we're also open water swimmers. With Mark here, we spent a lot of time swimming in the Moi Wo Bay. But the longest we'd ever done was 5 kilometers from Moi Wo over to Discovery Bay. And when we did that, we had kayaks supporting us. It was a big group that we went with. So until we did this, that was the longest we'd ever been. And one Sunday morning, we finished our open water swim. Shar and I were talking. We said, what if we tried to combine the two? What if we tried to combine our trail running and our swimming and see if we could do a whole loop of Lantau Island? And
so this was a trail run that I did one day. I did that. It took me about 14 hours to run. And this was using the trails. So Lantau has amazing trails. And most of the trails here, you can see they do follow the coast. But the Cathy came to me and said, how about we try and go even closer to the coast? And so we did a bit of exploring. We got a bit lost. We tried to go through these trails that were not used very much. And but then we decided, okay, let's go right on the coast and try coasteering. And that's when we started to look into the sport of coasteering.
So we sat down on a Sunday afternoon with the Lantau Trails map. And if you notice here, the red are the actual trails. So you see the trails really don't go that close to the water. So our challenge was to figure out how could we do this staying as close to the water as possible. So we started, we said, let's set off from Mwiwo, and we'll go Mwiwo just to Shaplong first. Probably everyone here has hiked that at some point. It's the most common route out of Mwiwo. It's a very simple, hour walk from here to Shaplong, and then you can go over to Puyo. So quite an easy, so we said, okay, we'll start easy. We start at the end of the Mwiwo beach here. This was 7 a.m. on it was a March day. It was actually quite cold, and there was a monsoon warning.
Yeah.
So it was quite cold, and we really didn't know what to expect. But here, if you look at us, we're actually dressed more for running. And I'm going to show you the gear that we then learned as we went along, because we actually learned very quickly. But there was a learning curve that we had to go up as we started doing this. So here we are. It's a 1 hour hike to Shaplong. This probably took us 3 hours.
So that's a hike on the trail.
On the trail, yeah.
Cathy's talking about. So here we are right on the water's edge. And this took us about 4 hours. So it's much slower on the coast because you're climbing, you're swimming, you're trying to navigate, wading. So it's a much slower sport.
But what was amazing to us, we realized doing it this way was a whole new perspective on Lantau. We saw it in a completely different light. So here we're on rocks. We found ropes tied to rocks that maybe the fishermen use. We were able to wave. We were able to wave to the fishermen.
We saw quite a few surprised fishermen along the way.
Yeah.
Not used to seeing people on this.
Yeah, it's not something, and it's not something we're used to doing as trail runners. So it was a whole different perspective. So as we did this, we learned what gear we needed. And you'll see here, I'm wearing gloves. And we learned very quickly for the barnacles on the rocks, because we're going in and out, we needed gloves. We needed shoes that we could go from rocks right into water. So we were completely fluid in our movements. We did not stop and change anything in and out of water. We had to be fully dressed to go in water or on land. So we're wearing shoes. Very quickly we learned we needed long sleeves and we needed pants because of jellyfish.
So it's a jellyfish season. Around March, April is when the jellyfish come in on the ocean currents.
And we learned that the hard way. We wore trail running backpacks with camelbacks with water. We had very basic snacks. Everything had to be waterproof, double bagged. So here we wore swimming floats on our backs so that fishermen could see us. And then our probably prized possession tool that Char got was her net cutting tool, because we knew it was a problem with all the fishing nets that actually can be submerged 1 to 2 meters under the water, and we didn't want to be caught on something. So thankfully we never had to use it except on land. So here's the shoes we wore. Actually, Char just wore basic trail running shoes, but they need to be very lightweight. I was wearing a swim running shoe.
I actually went through 2 pairs of shoes because the bottom of the shoes just gets worn off with the rock climbing. So we had to make sure they were really grippy.
And half the time when we're going from land into water, we have no idea what's under the water. And here's an example where you really can't see what you're going to be walking on. And those were fully covered with barnacles. So yeah, there were some cases where we really weren't sure what to expect right under the water. So here's a picture of, in the end, all the gear that we had with us every day. And I just want to point out this was critical. I learned pretty quickly that I had to secure my phone to my body. So this is a waistband, and the phone was tied with a strap tied to my waistband because it was an as my husband says, it was a very expensive sport because we lost at least 2 phones.
Cathy lost a phone, and I lost a phone as well.
Yeah. So every good expedition needs a safety crew looking out for you. So we had a very accomplished safety crew. This was my husband and my daughter Caitlin at home watching our Google. Oh, where's the picture? It didn't come up yet. There we go. Watching at home on the Google Maps. So they're watching our dot as it's moving along the coast from the safety of the couch. And then we had Char's husband, Jono, who's an avid trail runner who's always up in the mountains. He was on the land. He was always on call. So they were both always on call in case we needed some rescue.
There was one day we went offline there was no cell phone coverage, so we went offline and we were totally fine, but everyone was like, do they need rescuing? What's going on? And we arrived in Tayo just at sunset. We had been out for the whole day. Yeah, but didn't need any rescuing.
And they got off the couch.
They were
starting to call each
contemplating
other.
it.
What
Yes.
are we going to do if they don't come soon? Okay, so the side of Lantau not many people see. So I think we know how beautiful Lantau is with the beaches and the beautiful trails and the mountains. So I'm sure many of us have seen these beautiful places. And I do a lot of nature photography, so I go out with my camera, and we have some beautiful, beautiful nature on Lantau. It's an incredible place for biodiversity. And so going on the coast, what I didn't realize was how interesting it was going to be for the nature and for what we started to explore and see along the coast. And often, even if you're on a boat, you go past the coastline and it looks kind of boring and not really that interesting. But when you're right there and in amongst the rocks and you start seeing all the details, so it was really fascinating. We'll show you some things. And so here is the map of our trip. We went around Lantau in 13 stages. And so this took us about 2.5 months. We started in March because even though the water was still cold, we didn't want to chance the electrical storms of summer, the lightning storms. So yeah, the cold water was a factor, especially around the Chima 1 Peninsula. I started getting hypothermic one day and really cold and shivering, couldn't warm up. And that was a very difficult terrain because there was huge boulders, and you'll see some of the boulders. So here's just a video of, we did a lot of swimming. So if the coast was too hard to coast steer, if the cliffs were too steep, then we swam.
So the actual definition of coasteering is traveling in the intertidal zone, which is roughly 1 to 2 meters on land and 1 to 2 meters. Actually, it depends where you are in the world, but it's where the tide plays, and you're traveling under your own energy. So no boats, no equipment. So that's the definition. So that's what you see here. We're moving from rocks into the water. And we were really going back and forth. We would travel along the rocks. We would find we'd gotten quite tired, and we'd say, now it's time to get in the water. Or we'd get hot, and we'd go in the water for a while. So it was nice to go back and forth. But look at the size of these rocks. This is the Chimawan Peninsula.
It was actually quite an interesting way to go because it was like puzzle solving. We would have to find our way around the boulders, and every now and then you'd reach a place that was too steep, and you'd have to double back and find your way around. So it was quite, you had to be quite intuitive. It was quite an interesting way to explore the island.
So we saw, as Char mentioned, all kinds of coast. It was amazing, the variety that we passed over. Every day was so different. And we would be out there 8 to 10 hours every day. These were long days. Sometimes we came to areas where we just couldn't get through, the big rocks. Sometimes we had to get creative to get through. Sometimes we had a little help. There were we'd be out nowhere, places that had no trail access, and there would be a ladder. So clearly fishermen were using this, or we'd find ropes that we could, we were always a little nervous. Sometimes we got to very scary places. So it doesn't look very scary there, but this is probably 2 meters drop down to the water. We actually couldn't get in the water because there was a boat wreck, and so there was metal sticking up in the water, just rusty metal. So we had to cross over the rocks. And this plank there is about this wide that I didn't think was ready for my weight. So it was a little nerve-wracking going across here, but we made it. We crossed incredible pebbly beaches. So this is the Puyo, Changsha, Tongfuk stretch towards Shuihao. So this was quite a nice day to be able to just walk along here. Lots of remote little beaches that, again, no trail access. This is Fan Lao, another beautiful remote beach. We came to man-made coast. This was actually, and I just learned, I believe this is the food recycling plant, food waste management plant that's between Sunny Bay and, past Sunny Bay towards the bridge. No.
On the other side.
Yep. Yeah, I'm not before the bridge, though. So there were big pipes with stuff coming out. There's other waste management plants there. So we were a little nervous about swimming in the water. We went along the edge of the Airport Express. There's the train going by overhead. This is the part you may have seen if you've been on the Airport Express right outside the Sunny Bay Station. This was a timber yard in the 70s. And what they would do was lay the logs in the water because they believed that salt water made the wood more resilient and hardy. But it hasn't been used in, 20, 30 years. And then, of course, we went on the backside of Tongchong and swam right with the towering high rises above us. And this was probably the most dangerous. This was going under the Chingy Bridge. And so we'll come back and talk about that when we talk about tides. We swam in the channel between the airport and Shalongwan, that whole stretch between Taiyou and Tongchong. So quite amazing to be swimming with the planes going off, going over right there, lots of fishermen out. So again, that was every day was very different, and I'm just going to show the map again of the 13 stages that we did. So there you can see is where we went through by the airport. And then, of course, among that, we also passed some tourist sites. So here's the General's Rock outside Taiyou that actually neither of us had been there because you have to take a boat to get there, so it was nice to swim by. And then on that note, we saw some incredible rock formations and different types of rock as we went around Lantau.
So one of the things we discovered on our trip were the rocks of Hong Kong, and we started to see some really beautiful boulders, and I just absolutely love this dramatic boulder that's just wedged up there, and you can see this one. This was when I was freezing cold and shivering, and we were trying to weave our way through these huge boulders and just jump from one boulder to another that was submerged in the water. It was very, very cold. And then Cathy fell onto her knee and broke her glasses, and it was just a really chaotic moment. Dramatic moment, and we ended up swimming in the water again. That was a really big day out. So yeah, this was a very difficult stage. So not all stages were this difficult. We saw some really amazing rock formations. I just absolutely love. This is Chima 1.
This is facing Changchao.
And I started to learn about the geology of Hong Kong. As you can see really clearly on the coast. And the green is actually an old volcano. So there were actually 4 main volcanic episodes in Hong Kong, including a supervolcano, which is on the geopark side, on the eastern side of Hong Kong, which is quite exciting because there's only 50 supervolcanoes in the world. And they only recently, the geologists realized that it was one huge volcano. And the interesting thing about Lantau is that there's rock from all of those 4 main volcanic episodes on Lantau. And another thing that's quite interesting and unique about the island is you can see the pink and the red. That's a swarm of dikes. And that's a whole collection of dikes. So a dike is basically when there's a volcanic rock has flown through into a gap between another rock. And so you can see here is an example. And so we saw these beautiful volcanic rocks here. This is a basaltic dike here, this very dark rock. And there was quartz. And then as we went around the coast, the rock started to change color. And you saw these really amazing, almost like sulfuric yellow and pink. And so we started to ask questions and find out about the oldest rock on Lantau is near Tayo. And you can see it has these really interesting patterns. The red is when iron has soaked into the cracks of the rock and has oxidized and turned it red. And so here I'm swimming up towards, this is called tuff, which is a rock it used to be volcanic ash and it's turned into rock. And you can see it here quite clearly. So you can see Lantau Peak behind me. So Lantau is made of volcanic rock and tuff. And this is a big basaltic dike that's just right here. We call it the yoga house beach. Do you know it? There's a rock right there. And so it's quite interesting. As we started to learn more about the rocks, you start to see more. Before it was just a dark rock on the coast. And then you start realizing, oh, actually, it's a volcanic rock. So yeah, that was a very interesting part of our journey, is learning about the different rocks of Hong Kong.
So we went out almost every weekend, and so there was a bit of prep that came out. Usually about Wednesday, Char would start messaging me with the tides and the currents and the weather for the following weekend. We'd say, okay, it all looks good. Let's go for it. But these are the 3 things that we had to look out for, and that's the weather, tides, and currents. So we were very lucky. We really didn't have any storms. We may have had to change some days a little bit because of forecast, but the weather was good. We would look at the tides, and we like to move at low tide because then we had more options for walking on land. So we would look at the Hong Kong tidal charts and kind of pick the time of day, and usually that meant going early in the morning. So some of our early days were 5 a.m. We'd get out and head out. So here's going into Tongchong. This is a great example of a day that was good to move at low tide, because even over here we could not have moved on those rocks, and so it just made for easier moving. This was a sign in Tongchong.
We found the mud in some of the areas was so thick.
Yep.
And so, it was there's actually a funny story. The mud is so sticky that if you stop walking just for even a moment, you start to sink. And then it's incredibly hard to pull your feet up again, and your shoes almost come off. And we had gone through Shamwat? No.
Shamwat, near Shamwat.
And I felt something in my shoe, and I thought, oh, there's a piece of mud or something in my shoe. And so I took my shoe off and actually realized there was a dead fish in my shoe. I think what happened is, as I was pulling my foot out the mud, a fish swam into my shoe, and then I stood on it. It was just a surprising moment, and I think there were many surprising moments on this trip.
Yeah. And there was another time where we learned the easiest way to move was actually on all fours, because then you wouldn't sink. So we do have a picture somewhere of Char on all fours. Yeah. So that's the tide, the weather. Currents was the next thing, and this was the most important part, was to get under the bridge, which has some of the strongest tides in Hong Kong. I think there's a little delay there. Yeah, I should have.
We have a picture of a horseshoe crab shell. Yeah. The mangroves were really... Oh, there you go.
So tides, very, very important. As you know, they can be very dangerous. And so we always looked at tides to make sure we were moving with tides. Because a lot of days, if the tide was nice, we could get in the water and just float with it. So there was one time coming up under the bridge where we wanted to get to land, and that was the hardest part. It was, it was moving at 3, the strength of the tide was...
the current?
Yeah, the current, sorry, not tide, the current was quite strong. Okay, let me just... I'm going to skip that part. So yeah, we would watch. So here we are coming up under the bridge. And if you look closely at the water, it's... So we actually got out and walked that. But that day we started out very early from Sunny Bay, and we knew we had till about 11 or 12, and the tides were slowly getting... The current was slowly getting stronger, and then suddenly it was going to reverse and come the other way around that point. So we managed to get around the point, and then from there, you go from there to Sunny Bay, where we could walk on the land when the current was against us.
So Hong Kong has some very good prediction charts. You can see exactly the direction of the currents, how strong they'll be, and what time of day. And so they actually change in relation to the tides. And so we knew exactly when the currents would be turning against us, so we were able to plan around the currents. But I was very nervous around this area. I spent a lot of time researching exactly what was happening. So that we had one section where we had to swim just across the bay, and it was just a huge push to get past this current, which is so, so strong. So even though it doesn't look very dramatic, the push of water can be really, really, dangerous. Okay, so we'll go through some of the nature we saw. So the barnacles, we actually saw someone harvesting these barnacles, though she said she didn't like to eat them herself. so that was quite interesting. And they were just thousands of these little sea cockroaches, or they would just scatter as we went along the rocks. And this was a really interesting cave. You can see it. I don't know if you can see, a whole bat colony in there. So we climbed in through to the cave, and we could smell this pungent smell, and we heard the chittering sound, and then we looked up and we saw there's the whole roof of that cave was completely covered with rosette fruit bats. And then there were a lot of the chitin's and the oyster shells. They don't look sharp, but if you just touch them, they just slice you. So so we wore long pants and we had gloves, but we still they would snag our pants, and it was we had to be careful. And the interesting thing about traveling on the intertidal zone was the interaction of land animals and insects with the sea. And so there was one section, there was a lot of these cicadas, or cicadas. Do you say cicadas? And butterflies. Often we'd be swimming across a bay and a butterfly flies past. So I've actually seen butterflies. I think they fly from Lantau Island right across to Lantau. They actually migrate. And crabs, we saw this beautiful ghost crabs. They're quite hilarious to watch because they go up on their legs, and then they I've seen them in the water, and they it's almost like they don't like their eyes getting wet because they're constantly cleaning their eyes off. So Hong Kong actually has over 50 different species of crabs. So again, the biodiversity of Hong Kong is phenomenal. So that crab's about this big. Wow. And actually, they live here on Moi Wo Beach. But they're very, very shy. So you'd have to sit on a quiet morning and just be very calm and quiet, and then you'll see them coming out their dens. If they see you, they quickly run back into their den.
Didn't we see the most in Shui Hao, actually? The flats of Shui Hao, we saw quite a few different types of crabs.
Yeah, the mangroves are really beautiful in Lantau and really important to protect. And so these are mangrove tree flowers, and you can see how it looks quite swampy, but when you get up close, the animals that live in the mangroves are amazing. And actually, in Hong Kong, just a few years ago, they discovered a new crab, new to science. It's a little arboreal crab that climbs trees, a little micro crab. It's just about the size of my nail. It's just this tiny little thing. And so they're still discovering new things in Hong Kong. Actually, I'm very proud that one of a moth that I took a photo of and a spider undescribed as well. So it's always so exciting when you take a photo of something and then you realize this has never been seen before or not been described yet by science. And the mangrove trees are really interesting in that they have this process called vivipary, which is you can see the seed pods on the tree. They start to germinate while they're on the tree, and they start growing their roots. So when they fall into the tides, when they land into the mud, they can start growing really fast. So it's just so fascinating to see how they have these prop roots because it's very unstable in the mud, and they even have a way of getting rid of salt through the leaves. So it's quite interesting. And Hong Kong has wonderful, diverse mangrove plants. And this was a sea hare. It's a type of sea slug we saw. And of course, the horseshoe crab. So the Chinese horseshoe crab is actually an endangered species, but unfortunately you can still find them in the restaurants. And so more work needs to be done to bring awareness about the need to protect the horseshoe crabs. And this beautiful set of eyes belongs to a mud skipper, which is a fish that goes on top of the land. They're quite hilarious to watch. They skip and they skip along with their fins. And then, of course, this is actually a deadly plant. The fruit of it, it's called a sea mango, is actually used by people to put poison on the arrowheads for their hunting. It's so deadly poisonous that you just wouldn't know until you find out. And then, of course, the morning glory. And this was an interesting creature. We saw these two of them just sinuously swimming in the water. And I thought, what are these? Are they squid or what is it? And I don't suggest touching this unless I had gloves on, but this is called a fireworm because it can give you such a bad rash, a terrible rash with blisters, and that can last for days, weeks. So, and actually they have recently discovered a new species of fireworm in Hong Kong. And then we spoke about the jellyfish before, and so here we are with the jellyfish. So Cathy got stung by jellyfish. Actually, we had that on that one day when I was getting hypothermia. Cathy fell on her knee. Then Cathy got stung by a jellyfish. It was just, it was a big day out. But this is a flower jellyfish. And I saw something in the tentacles, so I tipped it over. And I was very interested to see that there were these brittle stars. And they hitchhike in the jellyfish. And they actually steal the food from the jellyfish. It's quite interesting. And some of the interesting connections we made through this trip was the Hong Kong Jellyfish Project, which is run by a guy called John. And he is studying the jellyfish in Hong Kong. And so you can take a photo of any jellyfish you see and send it to him. You can even there's even a form on when you get stung, on what it felt like and how long the rash stayed for. And we both, because I also was swimming along and I turned my head and my whole face was covered with jellyfish tentacles at one stage. And I was panicked taking them off. But strangely, I didn't really experience much pain. It was just my lips went numb. So I think some jellyfish, they have different levels of, the venom is different levels of toxicity in them. And yeah, so it was quite an interesting journey. And then the other thing is the bloom, they really work on trying to reestablish the biodiversity of sea life in Hong Kong. So, and here we are getting up and close to nature. It was just a fabulous adventure discovering all these amazing sea creatures. So Hong Kong is just a really amazing place for nature.
So we spent a lot of time, many hours out there. We didn't see anybody. We could go easily 6-7 hours with maybe one fisherman would go by in a boat, look puzzled at us. Some of them waved, some of them. We had one that did ask us where we were going, and so we were like pointing Tayo. Oh, I think the best was we're in the water and a fisherman went by and he starts frantically gesturing to us and saying something, but we couldn't hear him, saying something in Cantonese. We couldn't hear him because we were in the water, and we're like, we hope he kept going like this. And we kept, well, hopefully that's not a shark or something. We think he was trying to tell us there were jellyfish up ahead.
Yes.
So that was our one, very little communication, in other words, with people. But we did, I think there were some very interesting encounters with civilization. So it was fun to be out there. Here's a village past Fan Lao. No, sorry. This is on the way between Tayo and Tongchong. Little village there. We saw temples. We saw a figure of Mary, this big, out on one of the rocks. So we got a little religion out there. We stopped in Shamwat. We were really looking forward to this, to come up, sit at one of the tables right on you come out of the water, out of the marsh, sit right there on the road on a table and have a bowl of tofu pho. And we spent all morning talking about that as we left Tayo. We were so looking forward to it. And then it took us like 3-4 hours to get there. So that was a pleasure. Of course, we did have some negative. This was the only part of Lantau we could not stay in the water. We just felt like with the construction we couldn't do it. That's in Tongchong, unfortunately. So that was a little disappointing. We would come up upon some fences that was hard to access the water, so we did have to walk that. That's okay. We walked out and walked right into a Starbucks that was right there and got our coffee and kept going, and no one paid any attention to us. That's so Hong Kong. We were dripping wet, probably had seaweed hanging off us, went into Starbucks and then kept going. Then there was the garbage. We did see quite a bit of litter. This was coming out of Tayo and saw some very interesting stuff, actually. It was an interesting study of the type of stuff that washed up. We did see shipwrecks, a lot of like broken down boats. Like leisure boats, like kayaks, not kayaks, but yeah, there were a couple kayaks. So anyways, we saw quite a wide range of ships and boats, and some of it was quite handy that we saw. We got to take a rest here on a remote beach. And then at the end of every day, we had to find a place to get out, get back to civilization so we could go home. And then we had to get out in a place that we could come back to start again. So here we are, came out at Disneyland and rode the MTR. And of course, any trip around the coast of Lantau would not be complete without a visit to Penny's Bay. So here we are going around the fence at Penny's Bay. And occasionally we'd be out in some really remote beach that had no trail access, and we'd meet up with people. And they offered us drinks. They offered us food. we each had a soda and waved goodbye and went on our way.
So we're nearing the end of our talk now, but some of the things that we also discovered were some of the history of the island. And so as we went along, we started thinking about the pirates and the smugglers. And actually, when we particularly went across down towards Tayo, we started seeing these big pieces of rotting meat on the shore. A lot of it, like quite large chunks of rotting meat. And we were, this is disgusting. What is this? And we actually Kathy discovered that there's still smugglers who smuggle out frozen meat to the mainland. It's a multi-million-dollar business. And if you look on the news, often there's quite frequently, they'll say they've caught people. But if the marine police are about to catch someone, they will sometimes jettison their meat before they get caught. And that's what we were seeing, had floated onto the land. And so we also started learning about some of the last big pirate battle was fought in Tayo Bay. And there's been some really exciting pirate stories and some interesting history. And it all happened on this island. So it was quite interesting when we're swimming across a bay or traveling on the coast, imagining what it must have been like at that time. And also we walked through the Tung Chung areas, lots of buildings, and then straight into the fishing village. It just felt like we walked back into time, because it was just this little village with there was a group of people swimming, the Saturday morning swimmers, next to the pier. So we joined them and then went along our way. And then also the Loke One. This is the site where the people smugglers were smuggling people from Vietnam to Hong Kong. And the marine police were actually intercepting the boats and then, arresting the smugglers. And at one stage in this boat, the Sen-On, the pilot, the captain and the crew abandoned ship near Macau with the money that they had taken. The ship was full of people. And they just said, Hong Kong's in that direction, go. And the people left on board did not know how to steer the ship. And so they just, when they came inside of land, they saw a beach and they just rammed the ship right back onto the beach. And so there's actually a very interesting photo with Les Bird, who actually spoke here at Vibe before. And he was the first one on scene and has a fascinating photo of the Sen-On beached on this beach. Now it's just pristine and quiet, but it's just an interesting part of our journey to learn about the history of Lantau.
And here we are finishing back into Mui Wo Bay.
So part of we were so interested with the amazing things we learned that I wrote a book about our adventures, and it's full of photos of things and there's my Instagram of the nature photography that I do. So thank you very much for coming.
Okay, excellent. What a great talk. Thank you both very much. So we've got time to take a few questions, if anybody's got some. Just raise your hand and I'll come and put the microphone in your mouth.
I just want to know the dynamics between the two of you. This was a huge commitment. And doing this for a few months, how did you decide which you were going to do with the times when you were in the water and one of you wanted to go on land or vice versa? How did that work out? I assume you were friends before, and you seem to still be friends. How tough was that to maintain?
Actually, we really didn't know each other that well. I mean, we were friends through our Sunday morning swimming, but we had a blast. And I think it was the conversations we had. We had incredible conversations about our families, about all kinds of books we were reading. So I think that was, it was amazing. We would spend 8 to 10 hours a day and covered incredible topics.
It actually was an absolute highlight of my week, because the day before you're packing your bag, getting everything ready. Before dawn, you're out the house, and then you're just not thinking about anything except it was so physical, finding a way around and being aware and being careful and just enjoying the adventure. So it really felt like just leaving everything behind and just spending a fantastic adventurous day on the coast.
Okay, any more questions? Okay, Chris.
So how did you get around the mangroves? Wasn't that pretty muddy around there?
Yes, it was muddy. What we discovered is you had to keep moving. If you stopped at all, you would just sink. And so there were a couple of times when one of us would fall over because you would get bogged down. But then, as Cathy said, some of the areas we realized actually we had to crawl through some of the places. Yeah, so the mangroves were difficult the mud was so thick and difficult to navigate. That was, difficult to get through.
We learned some tricks, like you get closer to the trees. The farther you are away from them, it's hard, you get sucked down. So we learned, quickly, there were some tricks to getting through there. The big one was the one into Chamois, because the day we went in there was low tide. So I think on some days we could have just swam right into that bay, but we had to walk through the mangroves. It was grueling.
Okay, I've got a question. You've done this coast-steering trip now. Have you got a taste for it? Any other islands you want to conquer? Peng Chau, Cheng Chau?
We actually we went out, Caitlin actually came with us. We kayaked out to the Soko Islands and we camped overnight on the one island, and Cathy and I did a coast-steering around half the island. The currents out there are much stronger. And so it was a very different experience. And then the next day we kayaked to the next beach, and there we had hectic storms. It was like lying in your tent and it's just hundreds of strikes of lightning. It's like, don't die. And that was a very exciting, and we also have gone around Sunshine Island and Peng Chau Island, and I've been doing some research into some of the other islands. So the Hong Kong archipelago has over 250 islands, and so I've looked into it. There's about 50 islands that are easy to access, and then there's some that you probably need to get a kayak. So we actually have plans to go to Sharp Island. There's a coral reef there, and so I've done a bit of a recce. So we're going to coast steer up one side of the island, then we'll hike over the top of the island. The views are amazing out there. So Hong Kong is just absolutely amazing, and the adventures you can have are just, you can choose your own adventure. The choices is amazing.
Okay, any more questions? Jackie?
So are you two the first people to coast steer around Lantau?
So we are the first ones to do it the way we did it. There are runners that have come close to the edge of the water. There's a guy who's more rock climbing, but for, I think, true coast-steering in the water.
Yeah, I think there's a man called Brandon, and he's a real amazing adventurer. I think he went all around Hong Kong Island and then immediately came over to Lantau and did Lantau, but I think he used some of the coastal trails as well. So the fact that Cathy and I went on the coast, the only part that we were pushed back is that Tung Chung section where they have land reclamation, but we were the ones, I don't know of anyone else who've gone right on the water's edge like we did.
There's been two guys that swam around.
Yes,
and
then there's swimmers.
There's people who did stand-up paddling around the island. People kayaked around. Hong Kong is full of people who do these crazy things. So it's been this was just our experience. I think there are other people who have experienced the amazing diversity of different adventures around the islands.
Okay, any other questions? I'm sure you'll be able to chat with Cathy and Char afterwards. So we're going to wrap it up there and say thanks everybody for coming, and what a great talk. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.